Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, in this episode, we're revisiting an important discussion within conservation and something which might be affecting you, namely barriers to entry, which make it difficult to pursue careers for women, people of colour, indigenous people, and other underrepresented groups. Now, to discuss this in detail today is Lynn Mento, the CEO of a new organization called Conservation Nation. Now, Conservation Nation is dedicated to protecting wildlife by providing funding and networking opportunities to conservationists from diverse backgrounds. They're seeking to help change the conservation profession from a field of exclusion to one of inclusion and growth. Now, in this podcast, we discuss the lack of diversity within conservation, the problems it causes, and also explore some potential solutions that Conservation Nation are developing. We also discuss Lynn's exciting role and career to date, and she shares her advice with you, the listener, if you're seeking to start your career in the sector. It's a thoughtful, sobering, and inspiring discussion. Enjoy.
I'm Lynn Mento, and I'm the CEO of Conservation Nation.
Great. Well, thank you for jumping on the Conservation Careers podcast, Lynn. It's really nice to be talking to you about issues around diversity and inclusion within conservation, and also how you're seeking to tackle it, and also your career as well. It'd be really interesting to kind of hear about everything that's going on in your world right now. But let's start with issues around diversity, because Conservation Nation, you're here to better understand issues around the deficit of diversity within conservation, how that historically has come about, and also, trying to explore ways in which we can tackle that as a movement. But it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts, because I know you've done some surveys recently as well, looking at issues around the diversity deficit. What have you found in terms of what you'd expect within conservation and what you actually observe?
Yeah, it's really shocking. It was shocking to all of us, Nick, as when we went through this process. And of course, as you know, the planet is facing this existential threat of biodiversity loss coupled with climate change. And it is our belief, and I know it's yours, that we need to bring everything we've got to this fight to save the planet. And yet, when you look at the percentage of people, at least here in the US, that can afford to become conservationists to join this fight, it is shockingly low. And if we are to give this fight all that we need, we have to start breaking down these barriers that are keeping the vast, vast majority of Americans at this stage from being able to become conservationists. So we did some research and talked to conservationists and asked a few pointed questions, and it was really interesting. So out of our survey, 80% of conservationists reported working for free. So that's one of these barriers, that you have to be able to volunteer for free. You have to be able to intern for free. So whereas other kids, including me, were out waitressing over the summer to get some money, you have to be able to work for free. And that's a privilege. And that's a privilege that very few people can afford. And of those 80% who worked for free, almost half of them worked for free for a year or longer. So that privilege is enormous. And we broke that down between women and people of color. And women and people of color in conservation are far more likely to have worked for free and to have worked for free for longer. So you have this barrier that's standing in the way of, you called it the diversity deficit, that's creating this diversity deficit, that there are people who want to join this fight, that we need to join the fight, but they weren't born with the privilege, the access, the money, the time, the networking that allows them to get into conservation. And those barriers simply can't stand if we're going to give this fight for biodiversity all we've got. So that was a huge focus of ours, saying that we need to jump into this field. We're tiny, but jump into this field and help be a force for good and a force for energy and collaboration, and help break down these barriers that are keeping people from becoming conservationists in our increasingly wonderful, diverse country.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important mission that you're kind of driving towards. Do you see, when you kind of look at survey results or just talk to conservationists or aspiring conservationists in the US, do you see there's like a groundswell of interest, people wanting to be conservationists, but actually those with more privilege, with deeper pockets, or more support, whatever that might mean, tend to go further quicker, and people sort of ebb away. Do you see like a bottleneck?
We do. So these barriers that I mentioned hit particularly hard on those from disadvantaged communities,
Right.
people of color, indigenous Americans, women, girls dropping out of STEM. And it is those groups, those sort of, I'll call them traditionally underrepresented groups.
Yeah.
It is those groups that are struggling more than others to make it in. And what we have found, you can see it in the numbers. So you can see that, one of the least diverse career degrees in the US is environmental science. Only 2% of environmental science degrees are going to African American Black students. Hispanic, Latino Americans make up, by some accounts, only 4% of the conservation field, and yet 2 out of every 10 Americans identify as Hispanic, Latino. And women, although women are absolutely making inroads into the conservation field, which is fantastic, there's still only about a quarter of the leadership of environmental organizations, and they author less than 15% of most major research papers on environmental science. And so we see it in the numbers, and we also see it anecdotally. I'll give you an example. When we were researching the Conservation Nation Path over the summer, we just launched in September. Over the summer, we had the opportunity to talk to this wonderful woman. Her name is Taylor Bland. She works out at Yellowstone, and she has a full-time job to pay the bills and a full-time volunteering job to help support wolves and the Wolf Project in Yellowstone. So she was working sun up to sundown, 7 days a week, young Black woman, struggling, high passion, high intelligence, struggling to make it and to parlay this volunteering job into a paying job, as so many of these struggling emerging conservationists are trying to do. And when one of the times we talked to Taylor, she was really disheartened. She said, I'm exhausted. I don't know how much longer I can go on. And I drove by my local Taco Bell, and they have a sign out that they're paying $4 more per hour than this job I'm volunteering for free to try to get. And she was kind of at her wit's end. And, her fiance, Jack, considered himself one of the lucky ones because his mom, a single mom hairdresser, was able to work nights to give Jack the money he needed to pay for a free internship, which you've probably heard of. You pay for these free internships. And so Jack was able to parlay that into a paying job. But listening to Taylor and that little heartbreak in her voice, that she has dedicated her life to this and does not know how much further she can go on, and is saying, my God, should I throw it all up and go work at that Taco Bell for more than I could in this career? And Taylor's not alone in these stories. There are so many Taylors out there, and they simply don't have the resources that privileged Americans have that allow them to afford this career. The Taylor story has a happy ending. I hope, fingers crossed. It looks like we're going to be able to fund a paying job for her. So we're very excited about that. And hopefully we'll be able to get the final funding in and announce that in a few months. But so we see it in the numbers, and we see it anecdotally. We talk to people like Taylor. It's a big barrier.
Yeah, it is a big barrier. We recognize it too at our end. I think particularly the first paying job is the hardest one to get.
Yeah.
And again, helping Taylor into her first paying job, that kind of gets the career going. It kind of gets you into the market. You're being paid to get experience and skills, which makes you more employable, and the ball starts rolling. So it's that kind of first entry that you're sort of describing, which is so tough to kind of break through. What are some of the problems it creates then, if we're seeing only the more privileged people kind of making it through, or if they're making it through more regularly, if we can put it that way? What are the kind of some of the symptoms that that we see across the sector as a result of that?
Yeah, there are a few large problems with it. Yeah. So one is that if you consider biodiversity loss and climate change our largest existential threats, we are not bringing the diversity and scope and breadth of perspectives and viewpoints and ideas to the fight.
Right.
So it can become very insular if we have a world that is predominantly privileged white men and women. Mm-hmm. There's a perspective, there's a viewpoint, there's a sort of a heritage that they're bringing to these solutions, which are often not as broad as they could be, and are often not linked to the actual communities that are feeling the brunt of the challenge.
Yeah.
So one large issue is this lack of perspectives and breadth that can create the solution. The solutions are out there. We need breakthrough thinking for the size of this challenge. So we need fresh voices, fresh perspectives.
Yeah.
The other large challenge is it creates a death spiral, because as fewer diverse role models, conservationists, are out there, kids are seeing fewer and fewer diverse role models and conservationists. And you know that great expression, Marian Wright Edelman, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but if these kids are not seeing role models in conservation that look like them, come from communities like them, have walked past, cleared hurdles like them, then they're not going to see that as a career that they can go into. And if these kids are not seeing it as a career because of the dearth of role models, they're not going to go into it. And we will not have the conservationists we need to win this fight on biodiversity.
Yeah.
And if you look just at the US at this stage in the game, more than half of our kids under 16 identify with a racial or ethnic group, minority group right now. Yeah. And so what we're looking at is a nation that's becoming wonderfully more diverse. But as it's becoming more diverse and as the challenge of biodiversity is rising, the percentage of those who can see themselves in the field is shrinking and shrinking. And clearly, that's not how we're going to win this fight.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of research done on role models and the need for relevant role models and the power of seeing someone who looks like you. This whole concept of social belonging, which is the scientific underpinning of role modeling, basically reaches it saying that humans, like all animals, want to be with people like them. And kids apply that to career paths. So if you grow up in a community of firefighters, you are more likely to see yourself as being able to be a firefighter. Very, very few kids are growing up in communities of conservationists, particularly in these underserved neighborhoods. And so they're not seeing these role models. And, that Draw a Scientist study, which you might be familiar with, it's been replicated many, many times, but they ask kids at various stages, various genders, races, ethnicities to draw what does a scientist look like? Draw a scientist. And, it's crazy that about 70% of 6-year-old girls, when asked to draw a scientist, draw a female scientist. Fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. Only 25% of 16-year-old girls draw a female scientist. Mm. So this social belonging hits its peak in humans in adolescent years. And, we all went through it, right? With cliques and friends and all the rest of it. And the sad part is that is coinciding with when they're thinking about their academic paths and their career paths. And so you get this kind of death spiral situation where these kids are not seeing themselves. They don't feel like they socially belong in that group. They choose other career paths. Therefore, fewer diverse conservationists are going into the fight. Therefore, fewer kids are seeing it. And it just spirals down and down and down. And that's the second largest issue by not having the representation and inclusion in the field.
Right. And how did this all come about then? Because as you describe it, it seems very sad, but also kind of commonsensical. This is the situation that we have, but why is this situation like this? What has perpetuated or created, these barriers? What is it about conservation that's perhaps unique or different?
A couple things. It has a heritage of being a predominantly white male field. Uh-huh. So it has a long, long heritage in that. And secondly, the number one reason why conservationists and surveys say they became conservationists is because they had meaningful experiences in nature as a child. Mm-hmm. And a meaningful experience in nature as a child requires privilege. You have to have a place in nature where you can go. You have to have somebody who takes you to that place of nature and spends time with you. And you have to feel comfortable in nature and the outdoors. And here in the States, we've got a horrific history of terrible and terrifying things that have happened to people of color in the outdoors, a space that should be both sacred and for everyone. And it is not viewed that way. And that's a horror of our past, and in some cases of our present. And that clearly needs to be dealt with. But these kids from underserved neighborhoods don't have that privilege of these meaningful experiences in nature. They don't have the comfort level, and therefore they don't have that big jump in. They are not, on average, going to schools that are opening their eyes to this. They're not seeing the role models in the field. It's all part of this death spiral, and it needs to be broken. We're small, but we're going to do our part to help break that.
Well, let's talk about that then. Conservation Nation, it sounds like you're trying to tackle some really big issues ingrained within our culture and within our history, but also try and tackle some of the biggest problems that we're facing, biodiversity loss, climate change. So important, the job you're doing and the things you're trying to achieve. And you're new, you say you just started in September or in January right now, so you're only 3 or 4 months old, right at the beginning of your exciting journey. But tell us a little bit about Conservation Nation then. What is it, and how are you going to go about tackling some of these issues? What's your sort of initial plans and strategies? What do you see as the solutions?
So we see 3 paths for solutions. And just by way of background, Conservation Nation arose from an organization called Friends of the National Zoo, which supported the Smithsonian Institute of the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. We separated, weren't able to make it through the pandemic. We separated from the Smithsonian, and we are now standalone Conservation Nation. But we started Conservation Nation as an initiative of Friends of the National Zoo about 4 years ago. So we've got a track record of about $500,000 in grants we've given out. And we bring that track record and that 6 decade of experience of saving wildlife and supporting those who do save wildlife with us into Conservation Nation. Right. We officially launched in September, and we're taking 3 paths, Nick, to address those huge challenges, doing our part to address those huge challenges. So the first one is grants. So we are providing funds, and will continue to provide funds to conservationists, both emerging conservationists and mid-career established conservationists who have made it from these traditionally underrepresented communities. So think female conservationists, people of color in conservation, indigenous Americans in conservation, those from disadvantaged communities in conservation, and support their work. Say, here is money to fund your wildlife saving project today. Amplify their voice, connect them with others, and then ask them to be role models with us for tomorrow's next generation of diverse conservationists. The second path is this inspiration, this education and inspiration of tomorrow's generation of conservationists. So we're doing a pilot in our home turf of Washington, D.C. that should launch in about 2 months or so. And we're going into 2 high schools here in D.C. and inspiring teens to see themselves as wildlife champions, all the way up to pursuing a STEM academic and career path into conservation. But we know that they'll make many, many stops along the way. And what we want to point out to these kids is that they deserve a place in nature. They deserve to be part of this fight to save the planet. We want to support them. We want to give them an equitable leg up to get there. And we want them to know that wherever they choose to go in a career, that they can be a wildlife champion. You can be a hairdresser and be a wildlife champion by banning palm oil shampoos. You can be a chef and be a wildlife champion through some amazing sustainability work. So wherever it takes you, you can be a wildlife champion all the way up to entering the field of conservation. And so we'll be inspiring these kids, bringing in these role models with us. So seeing what we can do to break this death spiral there. It's just a pilot. We'll measure results over the summer, but we have big plans. Our plans are to roll this out. So my fingers are crossed on that one. Yeah. And then our third pillar to help break these challenges is convening. So it's basically, we are small. There are so many enormous players in the ENGO space, and everyone I've talked to feels exactly the same way. They completely see these challenges. They absolutely want solutions. They are hungry for diversity and breadth of perspectives and opinions. And so what we want to do is just be a helpful convener. So bring these ENGOs together along with some other thought leaders and say, what have you done that's worked? And congratulations. And how can we build on this together to try to find solutions? So we're setting up a roundtable. We've got some terrific funders joining us, someone from the Walmart Foundation and the Lumina Foundation and Blue Sky Funders Forum. And then we're inviting the ENGO leaders, and we just want to kick off a conversation and a brainstorming and a path to shared solutions. We're also going to be doing a speaker series. So we want to bring in conservationists who can tell their stories and share their challenges and how they've overcome them or not, and just get a conversation going on this. So we're going to be launching that. And then we're also very vested on the convening side and making sure that we are connecting our established conservationists and our mid-career conservationists and our emerging conservationists and the students. So just getting a little networking, mentoring group together. So those three pillars, the grants, the education, and the convening, are how we're tackling this, Nick.
Sounds great. It sounds really interesting. And there's so much going on within all that I'd love to know more about. I love this idea that anyone can be a conservationist, by the way. Yeah. So I really feel that too. It's not just a job title. It's That's not right. This plinth you get to sit on if you're privileged. This is a behavior that anyone can engage in. At any level. So that's wonderful. Yeah. So you don't have to be a professional to sort of save wildlife. Starting with the funding, then how does that work? Or how do you see it working at the moment? I know things are maybe evolving and changing and you're learning as you go. How do you select people for funding? Where do you receive the funding from? And how does that work? I'd love to know a little bit more about that.
We had our first round of grants that we gave out in October. So we gave out grants to 10 conservationists, some established mid-career conservationists, and some emerging conservationists. And those were we gave these out basically the month that we launched. So we got the connections for these conservationists primarily through sort of a friends and family network. That's not the long-term plan. Yep. So we are just about to launch a mid-year small grant for 2 conservationists. We're looking for mid-career conservationists, and that will open up I think that opens up this Friday, I want to say. And so there's an opportunity, and folks can go to conservationnation.org and see the opportunity in there and fill out the form. We'd love to hear from them.
Great.
And then we'll be doing another round of grants later on this year, and that will be a larger round of grants. And we'll go through a regular granting selection process, and folks can find that on our website as well. And we have a terrific advisory council on Conservation Nation. So we've got some wonderful conservationists and folks on the funding side, and they have been our selection committee. So they've been going through these applications. And our first 10 are fabulous. We very excited about them. So we have 10, and we've got a bunch that are mid-career and a bunch that are emerging. And we have 8 women in that group, one man and one non-binary person. And they represent a diversity of races and ethnicities. And they're doing terrific work. One of them, Cassandra Townsend, who's wonderful, is an indigenous American who is doing work on birds. Helping the forest owl understand the forest owl's issues related to climate change and sort of the microclimate of their nest cavity and how we can help them survive and thrive through climate change. And Cassandra is also, one of the things we love about it is very vested in her community and taking indigenous American knowledge and applying it to science, which is so important, and vice versa, bringing that perspective back into the indigenous community. So she's terrific. We've got another great one, more on the mid-career side, Tanoia Thompson, who is doing work on birds, botany, and the Bahamas. And she was raised between the Bahamas and the U.S. And one of the things we love about Tanoia's work is that she's very vested in education. So she wants these kids in the Bahamas to understand not only the beauty, but the impact and the need for support for their native birds. And that's what it's all about. It's all about getting opening these kids' eyes to the role that their importance and the role that they can play in our future. And let's face it, the future of our planet rests in their little hands. So she's doing terrific work. So we've got 10 amazing conservationists, and I'm really excited to see the next quick round of the 2 that are coming up soon.
Yeah, really exciting. And thinking about the future as well, like where do you see Conservation Nation going in the future? I don't know, 10 or 20 years from now? I'm right thinking you're US based right now. Are you looking to increase numbers within the US? Do you want to be global? Like where do you perceive the impact to be as you kind of develop and scale over time?
Yes. So right now we are focused in the US, but we are funding conservationists outside the US as well. And their work can be either within the US or outside the US. So we're funding work in Armenia, as an example, and Vietnam. So we, in 10 years, I have a vision. It's not going to happen in 10 years, Nick, but I love a big vision, which is that the field of conservation will represent the same diversity as our country right now. And we've got a long, long ways to go. There's a lot of green between here and there, as they say. But in 5-10 years, I want to see thousands of more conservationists in the field who represent the diversity of our country. I want to be saving species, making a huge impact in biodiversity. I want to help knit together larger solutions with this convening. And I want to be able to impact up to 1 million children here in the US and otherwise in opening their eyes to see themselves as wildlife champions. So we're starting on the education side in DC. We want to roll out nationally. And our conservation work, we want to roll that out globally. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, good luck. It's the beginning of a journey. It's really exciting to see where it's going to go as well. So, we wish you all the best, and we'll send as much traffic your way as we possibly can. I'd love to know a bit more about you, Lynn, as well, in your role. Something we discuss on the podcast is just like the individual job. Like, what's it like to do your job, and how did you get to where you are? I mean, you're the CEO of Conservation Nation. What does a CEO do? Like, what's your job day to day? How would you describe it to someone who doesn't know the sort of work that you do?
Yeah. Oh, it's a whole lot of trying to raise money. I'll tell you that much. So, to your point, I am not a traditional conservationist. So I have all of the respect and admiration and love for the scientists, yourself, others, your listeners who are out there fighting the fight in the field. My God, it's amazing. I do not have that. So I am a business person. But I like to see myself as a conservationist, as you said, in the broad terms, and that I have dedicated my career to helping to save wildlife, basically in support of people like you and your listeners. And so I came into running Friends of the National Zoo, the organization that we were about 8 years or so ago. I had a career in nonprofit and other places. That was my first foray into the field of wildlife conservation. And you just fall in love. So the minute you understand what's going on and you see these animals and you meet these conservationists, I found them so incredibly inspiring. Their passion, their commitment, their hard work, their enthusiasm in face of crazy odds. I just found them so inspiring. I wanted to spend the rest of my life around conservation scientists and just helping them. So that was my foray. Got to meet some incredible people at the Smithsonian Conservation and Biology Institute and the National Zoo. And so started that way. And then when we made this transition, I went from running this organization, and we had about, 275 employees and all of these operational tasks, as well as our fundraising, into this much smaller Conservation Nation. We have about 8 people, and we are focused on these 3 pillars, nothing really operational, these 3 pillars I mentioned. And so my day, I have an amazing team. So my favorite day would start with a little virtual powwow with the team. And I don't know about you, but I find this virtual work so hard in so many ways. There are advantages to it, but what I struggle with is holding on to the culture and helping people, particularly new people we bring in, understand and feel that same level of passion. It's difficult. It's one thing when you're sitting next to each other and you're just spinning around and talking, So my perfect day would start with a little powwow with the team, and then having conversations with potential funders and trying to dig up foundations that might be interested in supporting us, individual high-end donors that might be interested in supporting us, thinking through ways to bring in money and support and engagers that we haven't thought of before. So that's the bulk of my day. But my favorite part of the day after that morning powwow would be if I had the chance to talk to a passionate conservationist. So there's something so magical about having these conversations with people who feel this and love this. And, right before this call, I had a conversation with a potential funder who is a passionate conservationist, particularly vested in Yellowstone. And I was explaining the story of Taylor. And she said she would like to, she's going to talk to her husband, but she would like to fund part of Taylor. And how amazing is that? So that buoys you for the whole day,
Yeah.
And we're doing some really interesting work on the digital side. So we are working to create a website for Conservation Nation where people can feel a very direct impact from their money to the conservationists that they're supporting. So we're building out a system with a partner that involves blockchain. And so you've got this sort of immutable record of, I gave you $10. I now see that it bought a tree in Myanmar, a sapling to be planted, right?
Yeah.
So you get this sort of fantastic record of your money to that conservationist, and some interesting ways to interact with the conservationists. So when we think about our grantees, we're looking for people not only who are doing incredible work to help save endangered or threatened animals, but people who are really vested in education and engagement, who see the value of not only doing the work, but sharing their work, getting others into the loop, understand what they're doing, light a spark. So we're looking for opportunities to do that digitally as well. So that would be a really great day for me.
That sounds like a wonderful day to me.
Yeah, it does, right?
Yeah, and I share that need and that passion for kind of just talking to others and sharing and learning and connecting. Yeah, this remote work works okay, but it's not quite the same as being together. So yeah, I totally feel that too. It's funny, like people listening to this discussion, I guess from the outside, might be thinking, gosh, conservation is a really tough field. It's got all sorts of problems relating to it. And I might be interested in it, but actually you guys might be putting me off. What advice would you give someone who's listening who actually would really like to be a conservationist, whether they're from a underrepresented background or not? Have you got sort of careers advice for people who want to kind of really follow their passion and to pursue it as a professional, interest in the future?
Oh, I would say please do, because the world needs you. We need these wildlife champions. We need these conservationists out there fighting the fight. The planet simply won't make it without them. So I would say, my God, yes, please do it. I would say that there is, and I hope I haven't put people off. It is tough. It's not easy. All that said, there is such an enormous opportunity for impact. So there are ways that you can have an impact on wildlife conservation and biodiversity preservation, certainly by becoming a wildlife conservation, a biologist, an endocrinologist, a veterinarian, of course. And we would love to support people in that path. But really, anywhere you go, that mindset, that ethic, that perspective, anybody can take that in and have a terrific impact on conservation. I would say if you want to explore becoming a wildlife conservationist, be prepared for that work for free. So it's just the way it is. And we are going to do our damnedest to help break that barrier for the future, but it's there now. Yeah. So I would say that. I would say, secondly, there are a lot of people who see you. There are a lot of people who understand that this is difficult and that want to help. So we are one of them, but we are not alone. And so we are working to pull together others who share that same perspective. And I think that there will be more places that people can turn to for help and support with internships and volunteering. And we would certainly be one of them. And I'd be happy to talk to people about that. And I would say, thirdly, the networking piece. So it is a field driven by networking and connections. Yeah. So it is playing that game of making as many possible connections as you can and allowing that to sort of spider web out for more and more connections for you. So I would say get over any sense of shyness and fear. And so many of us have that, that this, I want to do this on my own, or I don't want to reach out, or I don't want to tap into Joe Schmo's connections. You got to get over that. You have to do it. And you have to do it because others are doing it. So if you want that equitable leg up in status, you have to do that same thing. So I would say get over the fear of networking, reach out to as many possible people as you can, send emails, make phone calls, and be bold in asking people to work for you, to work on your behalf, to help you break into the field.
That's great advice. Yeah. And I think networking can be a bit of a dirty word, but really I perceive it as just like making friends. Go out there and make friends with other like-minded people. And conservation is generally a very friendly, open place. Yes. We share that passion. So straight away, you've got something in common with them. And more
Yes.
often than not, other people are very willing and very open and supportive. So, if you're shy for whatever reason, absolutely fine, but try and break out of that bubble. I absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Just as a kind of a closing question, it's really interesting to kind of hear about how you think a little bit, I guess, and what your priorities might be. And I've asked it to a number of people. It's always an interesting question. Like, if I could make you a czar for the day, like a global leader, and you can enact a single law or decree, whatever you want to call it, that might make this planet a slightly better place to be for biodiversity, for nature. What law might you enact? What thing might you want to change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you what I'll tell you what I would ask if I was Czarina.
Yeah.
I would put a rule in place that every major corporation has to dedicate 1% of their net profits to funding conservationists and biodiversity work. And they can afford it out of their net profits. It would eliminate free internships. It would eliminate free volunteering. The field would grow significantly to better match the challenge at hand, and we would be guaranteed to have more diversity because it would be an equitable playing field. So that I wish you could make me czar, because I would love to do that.
I would second that. 1% for the planet. I think that's wonderful. Yeah, and what it would do is also it generate, as you say, it would generate more jobs, more roles, more
exactly.
impact as a result. So yeah, that's fantastic, and just sort of hard bake it into the system. Yeah, wonderful. Lynn, it's been a real pleasure talking to you and getting to know you and your work. I wish you and Conservation Nation all the very best, and happy to kind of help and support and to kind of track your progress over time too. If people are listening and want to find out more or get involved, where should we send them?
To our website, conservationnation.org. It's a US website. And also we're small, people can reach out to me, Lynn, Lynn, at conservationnation.org.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you again, Lynn. Nice to chat. We'll call it a day there. Take care.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks so much, Nick.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.